Welcome to the very special edition of Asian Business Conference. I think that this is the first time we are doing the entire conference virtually, right? But that shows actually how the technology plays actually the such an important role of reshaping the industry on the every aspect of our life, right? So my name is Hyun-Soo An. I'm a faculty at Ross Business School. So I teach data science and technology and also the consulting methodology to the MBA and the Master of Supply Chain student. So we have an exciting panel today, actually from all over the world. So the we have actually Paul Chase from Philippines, Sho Sada from the actually Osaka from Japan, and Darren Gifford in Michigan. Right. So the first question is essentially tell us actually who you are and then what's your current role at the company. So let's start with Darren. Right.
Thank you, Hyun-Soo. So yes, I'm actually not in Ann Arbor though, as Hyun-Soo was asking me earlier. So I'm based in Southeast Michigan, and our Plant Moran, our headquarters are in Southfield, but we have 20 offices in Michigan. So I'm a partner at Plant Moran. I lead our strategy consulting practice from a consulting services standpoint, and I also lead our automotive industry from all of our services perspective. And being in Michigan, automotive is very significant. I've worked in industry and consulting, so it's been automotive and electronics and technology for over 40 years. And it's changed a lot in 40 years, as many of you might imagine. So that was before most of you were probably born at that point. So it was quite different. I have to say, back when I was in school, which is a little scary to say. So the Apple was just starting. So it was only the Apple II, I think 2C, I think was the first moniker. So before the Macintosh and all those things. So it's quite interesting for me to go back and read about Steve Jobs in those days and how they got started. Over that time, I worked in manufacturing a lot, and so I also looked at the technology in manufacturing and how that's changing since that time. But I worked on one of the first robotic lines that General Motors was installing back in the early 80s. And it was very difficult because the technology was very crude at that point. And then I've been in consulting now for over 30 years, and it's technology. We'll talk about that, I know, and how it plays a role in our career. But it's obviously changed a lot, even to like virtual meetings like this today, Hyun-Soo. Like as you said, this is everyone is going through firsts like this.
Yes.
So anyway, they're very nice to meet everyone here, and we'll talk about a lot of these other things today, I know, including GameStop probably.
Yeah. So our second speaker is Sho Kosaka. He's our former MBA student. So Sho, tell us actually who you are and your current role at the company, right?
Yep, thank you. Let me share my screen. I'm gonna use my slide. Well, nice to meet you all. I'm really glad to be here. I'm Sho Kosaka, CEO and the Chief Data Scientist of Metro Engine. Metro Engine is a AI tech startup in Japan, focusing on dynamic pricing to hotels and car rentals. And my profile is, so I was an MBA student of class of 2017. I graduated from University of Michigan. And actually, I was a student under the Professor Ann. So I took Professor Ann's classes and two classes. One was a core statistics class, and the other one was a applied data analytics class for business. The second one was the most demanding class I've ever taken, but it was really good, and actually it changed my life. So after studying data science and University of Michigan MBA courses, I changed my career into be a data scientist in a consulting firm. And after that, I became a COO and chief data scientist of a startup in Japan right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you. I'm very flattered, actually. Yeah. So if you are successful, so I'm responsible. If you are not successful, also I feel responsible. So, so now, so we have the outer speaker is a Patch, the Race from the Philippines. So Patch, tell us who you are and then your current role at the company.
Hello, everyone. Good morning to you all in North America, and good evening to everybody in Asia. I come from my name is Pot Shreyas, and I come from a technology background. I have a degree in computer science in De La Salle University here in the Philippines, and did the executive program in University of Michigan back in 2007. I will probably will not be speaking to you today if I didn't do that program. That has been a life-changing experience for me. My time in Ann Arbor, and it just flipped something in my head. And coming from a technology background, opened up my mind and perspective to broader business aspects, finance especially, in important pieces to really be successful in business. And I come from an entrepreneurial heritage as well. The company that I am a part of now, I essentially joined when it was about a year old, and eventually got some equity as part of being a manager, and eventually the president of the company. And from an experience of doing or growing the company organically over the years, we've been blessed to be found by NTT Data. Kosoko-san probably is familiar with NTT. Yeah, we're headquartered in Japan. In my spare time, I really love reviewing technology materials. I've helped a couple of authors publish books, and technology is my life, and it's going to be in the years to come.
Okay, so as you see, actually, we have actually speakers from all over the world. Actually, so now, I'm gonna actually go to each one of you and ask, actually, tell us your career experience in technology sector, and then especially since it's an Asian Business Conference, so what makes actually tech working in tech or the environment actually in Asia different from actually compared to US counterpart? So let's start with actually Darren, right? So
You're
you're
mute,
muted.
Darren.
Thank you. So, can you hear me now? It's okay?
Yes, very well.
Okay. So, yeah, technology has it played a key part throughout my career. If I go back in the beginning to the as I mentioned earlier, so I worked with robotics on the manufacturing environment, and technology. It in that environment, it's an application really to automate a human process, and it was very crude in those days. So it was what they called pneumatic type controls, so not electronic. The robots were doing very simple human functions, and I worked in manufacturing and managed manufacturing plants for several years before getting into consulting. I moved from more of an automotive into electronics environment, which is really where I began to work more with Asia. We had plants in Japan and China even then, so that would have been in the 1980s. And we made components and materials for printed circuit boards, and so the circuit boards have been getting smaller and smaller, but the same materials and components, frankly, have continued on, which is primarily copper-based for many of those types of items. Even though there is more fiber optics and glass now. yeah, when I moved into consulting, it's been a little over 30 years ago, and it was quite interesting. In a consulting environment, you have a broad exposure or exposure to a broad number of industries. And so I've had the opportunity to work with technologies in not only manufacturing environments, but also from a standpoint of within the automotive world, also the retail side, but also then energy and utilities, but not only utilities, but what is now becoming microgrids, but solar systems. And so I had the opportunity very early on to put in a very large solar field in the desert in Arizona. There was I think it was 4,000 acres of solar cells back in those days. Then also healthcare, and some of the technologies in healthcare have gotten very sophisticated, as we've found in the past year with the pandemic, and what you can do in those environments. For the most part, with technology, I think what I've found is that technology is not only just the good idea, but it's really how you use the good idea, or use whether it's a hard technology of some sort of hardware like a microchip, or it's the software that's utilized that takes that and can then transfer, frankly, the hard technology into some function that can be applied. And so even the GameStop example might be a good example of how to apply technology in a very creative way in the past week, in a very disruptive way. And so I think that's where I found technology in working with technology companies, but also technologies in almost every industry, and how they're used. You can, if with the right ideas and the right kind of planning, it can be create a very positive, disruptive impact. Hopefully, you want positive, but it became very disruptive. And in our consulting, I think a lot of our strategy consulting, we end up working with our clients in that regard, to start what's the next disruption that may occur in their particular industry, and how do they utilize technology effectively.
So then I'll ask same question to Sho. Actually, tell us about your career experience and in technology sector, and then what makes actually the working in technology unique or different in Asia.
Okay, well, so let me share my screen again. Well, so I think I started my technology career after graduation of the University of Michigan. So I started to learn data science and then data analytics in the business school. And after that, I started my career as a data science consultant in a Nomura Resource Institute, one of the Japanese biggest consulting firms. And I provided a consultation to education and energy, finance, and cosmetic, a wide variety of industries. And right now, Metro Engine is an AI startup focusing on dynamic pricing. So, well, now we develop our application to support how to set a price for hotels and car rentals. Like airline companies and hotel companies usually differentiate the price based on the day, based on when to book, and so on. We are supporting the kind of pricing with this application. Now, yeah, so this is our team. We are a pretty diversified team, especially about the nationality. Our founder is a Japanese, but almost 40%, 60% is Japanese, and 40% are from outside of Japan. Like right now, 6 people from Russia, 6 people from China, and 1 from India and from South Korea. And I think this is related to the difference between Asian tech industry and the US industry. there are many differences between them, but I think one of the biggest difference is human resources. In the US, there are many very excellent, capable immigrants, and many excellent immigrants helped at a startup like Google, Amazon, and so on to be a great global company. But I don't know much about the whole Asia, but especially in Japan, almost all companies work only with the Japanese people. So in that case, the human resource is kind of limited, especially software engineer. So very important for IT startups. But if you work with only Japanese, it's very hard to hire very excellent people. So I think that's a very big difference between the US and Asia. And that's why our strategy to make an organization is we work with a multinational people. So yeah, this is how I think about the difference.
So, but I noticed actually that like for Asian company, actually the you actually have very well diversified, especially not only in actually countries, the of origin, also in gender. So, right.
Mm.
So this is actually because when I actually visit the Asian farm, actually typically actually that like the percentage of the female actually is probably like 20% or less
Mm.
in many of the company I visited, but you're getting to almost 50-50 actually. That very makes actually very lively workplace, right? So right.
Yeah, that's true. It is not an intentional ratio, but we don't care. We just don't care gender. We just hire skillful people, and the result is like that.
Okay.
Mm.
So then Podge, right? So it goes to
Okay.
the same question. Actually, tell us about your career experience in technology, and then things actually you learned about actually what the unique features of actually doing a technology in Asia.
Well, from my background, started my career with actually as a software engineer for Microsoft ERP team, it's a Great Plains team. And so that was my exposure to like North American style of operations. I was there for several years and did a lot of programming work for the ERP platform. And after that, I joined this startup, as I mentioned. Now, essentially working with local companies here in the Philippines and for companies across Asia Pacific. And so that's and from a programming background, just like Osaka-san here, I've transitioned into analytics piece. That's essentially what I would say became a pivotal time in my career when I really, have done a lot and really have done very interesting projects for many of our customers here in the Philippines and around Asia Pacific. And on the environment here in Asia Pacific, I would say, well, first of all, the differences, right? My experience working for an American company and an Asian company, I would say the U.S. style is more, pretty rigid, straightforward. Kind of an interaction between employees and management. And in Asia, I think it's you cannot get more diverse set of culture in the different countries across Asia Pacific. The diversity here, and I just came from the ASEAN panel, and it's one of the we probably spent about 30 minutes talking about that. And the diversity here in Asia is immense, and and it's almost impossible if you're a multinational company operating across different countries in Asia Pacific to operate in a consistent manner 100%. In our case, I'd say we're 80% consistent and about 20%, unique in every markets that we operate in. And so that's dynamics, the differences in dynamics, I would say. Some of the differences between North American and Asia. And I think as far as where we are now in Asia, it's a hotbed of a lot of startup activities, a lot of technology and adoption, I would say, and growth here is the acceleration of growth in Asia Pacific. I would say is in the early stages. As opposed to other parts of the world where things are a little bit more on the mature side. Evidence to that are the increasing active. Well, number one, there's a lot more unicorns being born out of Asia recently. You have your Grab companies like as an example, and private equity. And even the big boys, the KKRs of the world are focusing on Asia more than ever, and really from early stage funding of startup companies to late stage funding, you see more and more action happening here over in Asia. Volume wise, I would say we're still far off. From the likes of how things are in the US, for example. Market players, market participants in the private equity and all, of course, in volume smaller, in amount of investment amount smaller, but I think over the next few years we'll see more and more volume and more companies popping up and really making a difference and in the world in the out of Asia.
So, but the both actually Shaw and Potch mentioned actually that the tech companies actually that whenever you introduce a new tech product or tech application, so often these involves AI or the data, right? So, but in order to actually offer such product, actually that means actually you need to collect the data from customer or the data from company or the data from government, right? So the in your experience, actually, that what are the consumers' general sentiment about, right? Company actually collecting data, and then what is your experience with actually the government or the regulation in Asia? So let's start with actually the Potch, actually the reverse order.
Okay.
So
Okay. Well, I think first of all, I think data privacy is something that we take very seriously and absolutely very important matter. And there are, not just ethical aspects into it, but also there are tighter and tighter rules around the globe in different countries, in the Philippines, and I'm sure across the globe around this, which I'm sure that everybody is aware of. And so, but at the same time, one good example is in times like this, especially when the pandemic hit. It is essential to be able to do, say, for example, proper contact tracing, proper advisory notification to employees and to the bigger population. Some form of collection of data is essential. So those are the two probably bands of around data collection, right? So there's the privacy side and the essential aspects. Of course, there are also bad actors and bad parties that use data collection to defraud people, hurt people, and put them into the disadvantage. And I think that's as far as and business ethics is concerned. There's no place for that as far as being operating within bounds of ethical boundaries, so to speak. And so based on my experience, of course, we abide with the rules that's in place, but at the same time, we make sure whenever we advise our customers, and this is now coming from a technology perspective, because we roll out technologies. And one, having rolling out technologies will entail giving some thought process, thought leadership, and some provoking statements to customers in certain ways of rolling out technologies, knowing their customers better to serve them better, right? And the topic of collection of data and understanding of behavior, for example, in retail, will pop up. And I'll just whenever we do those kind of conversations, we want make sure that our customers are aware of what are the boundaries we're talking about. And when we implement solutions, that we're also in a position to advise our customers that say, hey, you all have to put in some mechanisms where there's an opt-in and opt-out facility for your customers. In the case of applications that you install in phones, for example, when people download applications coming from from say a retail company, for instance, where you which is a primary, which is a form of a channel or interaction for you in your customers. It is important that all of these are properly taken care of, because personal information is personal information. It is sacred, and it is we have to operate within the boundaries of privacy restrictions.
Okay. So now I'm going to actually turn to show actually that since you're working on the dynamic pricing, so you will collect data actually constantly. So tell me about what kind of product and services you're offering, and also actually since actually I think the dynamic pricing is relatively new in Japan. So when you're trying to build a business, actually, what is general sentiment of customer or your client actually about the data collection and the using actually data to in pricing? Yes.
Yeah, sure. Well, we are providing dynamic pricing services currently for hotels and car rentals. We started with hotels, and since, well, in the past 2 years, we are receiving many requests from a wide variety of industries. Many companies want to introduce a dynamic pricing on their services, like express bus and the parking, airline, many industries. But car rental companies had a really strong needs about the dynamic pricing tool. So we chose car rentals as the second industry we provided this kind of service to. And essentially, we calculate the suggested price for the hotels and the car rentals. We used a lot of information, like how much competitors set a price, and how many reservation does the hotel get so far, and how is the weather forecast, and so on and so on. A lot of information is used by us. And yeah, so about data privacy, there is an interesting argument. So personal pricing is one type of dynamic pricing. Personal pricing is a little bit different from dynamic pricing used by hotels and car rentals. Personal pricing, let me explain briefly. So hotels, airlines, car rentals, they don't differentiate the price based on person. They differentiate based on check-in date, when to book and so on, but they don't differentiate the price by person. But a personal pricing offers a different price for different person. For example, on e-commerce like Amazon, they can provide a different price for different user because, for example, EC website can know each user's purchasing behavior. Like in the past, this user purchased this product with this price. And at that time, this user compared that product and this product and chose this product and so on and so on. A lot of information. So technically, that kind of company can calculate willingness to pay for each user. So in order to maximize the revenue, you can differentiate the price for different persons. So if I check the anything like camera, if I check a camera on Amazon, the price is, for example, $500. But if Professor Ang check the price, then it's the double can be double.
Why do I have to pay more?
because because your willingness to pay can be high. Well, yeah, but something like that can happen. But yeah, so there are arguments both for and against about this personal pricing. So that's very interesting for us. So and we need to be very careful to provide that kind of service.
But sure, actually, in the US, actually, customer more acceptable of paying different prices. For example, airline prices, probably if you randomly sample 10 people in the airplane in the economy seat, actually, probably the price they pay would be all different. But in your experience, do you think actually that customer in Japan actually agree or then just accept that kind of practices, or that actually you hit the resistance?
In the first, maybe they don't accept that kind of pricing because it is not a common. But it gets more and more popular if this is a very effective way to increase the revenue for the company. So I think the Japanese people could get used to it. But for example, if AI thinks the company should differentiate the price by like nationality or religion and so on. For example, yeah, if in extreme case, if the Asian people's willingness to pay is higher than others, then the company's AI could calculate the best price higher for Asian than others. But this is a very sensitive result. So in that case, maybe many people will don't accept that kind of pricing.
So we have a question from audience actually asking actually that, like, if that happens actually, that how do you actually avoid actually the essentially victimizing or becoming victim of sort of unfair pricing? Because actually that, so if let's say it actually gets into the actual human rights issues, actually, for example, if I have to pay 3 times more being an Asian, right? Then I think there's got to be some regulation of the customer resistance, right? And also legal issue actually about essentially discrimination, right? So how do you actually avoid actually the customer feeling about actually this is unfair, this is discriminatory, right? So sure, what do you think? So yeah, audience ask a question about.
Okay, yeah, audience ask this. Well, that's very. I think that's very difficult. Even the price provided by the hotels, they just differentiate the price by check-in date. But still, sometimes people get angry. Like if you book the reservation 3 months before the check-in date, it is cheap. And if you gonna book that the same reservation 1 day before the check-in date, it is pretty expensive. So this is, and I say, pretty normal situation. But sometimes people get angry. Well, it's, I think it's impossible to how to say, reduce, how to say, to eliminate the number of people who don't accept that kind of pricing. So the point is how to reduce the number of people who get angry about that kind of pricing. Well,
But that's
but,
the
Can I,
million-dollar question actually every dynamic pricing company faces. So
yeah, can I, yeah, because we worked with dynamic pricing with Hertz back 11 years ago and set up their dynamic pricing model. And it's interesting. I think it's an education process on the consumer on behavior, because if you go back 20 years or 30 years ago, people were used to paying the same price, right? And so if the 10 people on the airline, Hyun-Soo would have all said, we all got the same price because we're all sitting in coach, right? But today they all know that they have different prices because they bought at different times, right? Or they bought under a different arrangement. And so that some of that's an education of and a change in the behavior. So the consumer now gets it, right? And if they bought the ticket yesterday, they know they paid a premium for it. So that's their personal punishment. They're not happy, but there is more. It's better acknowledgement, not perfect, right? Because they might be unhappy. But I think it's that's one of the challenges on introducing a new technology, is that it takes some time for the consumer to adjust to it.
But Darren, actually, especially you working the automotive, actually, one of the biggest actually the technological advances happening actually that in the automotive actually with the autonomous driving and also infotainment, right? All this. So car is now just not the mechanical device. The car become more and more electronic, right? So then, so how do you actually sort of what's your sentiment of about actually that, like data collection and the using all this data, because especially it actually it'll collect actually people's mobility and also whereabouts, so it becomes very private, right?
Yeah, it's a raging debate, right? as we've all talked about. The interesting part, and maybe if I take a step back, if you don't mind, I didn't one quick comment, because I didn't talk about Asia in technology, but I think one of the key differences, and that links to the data question, between Asia is very difficult to lump all together, even though we're all Asians here, and my mother is also Japanese, so I'm half Asian anyway. So there a lot of innovation is really where technology gets started, and so much innovation, at least in the past decades, has started in the West, and then it's been moved over to China or Korea or Japan. Others have picked it up, and there's been some creation, but probably more innovation here that's moved over, and some of that's changing, I think, as we're evolving, as Asia's becoming more mature. There's catch up that's occurring. The data side of things is along the same lines, I think. I think that there's a lot of innovation here around automobiles, because we've gotten the technology is getting better. The technology existed for a long time. So I worked with Tesla during the startup of Tesla. So going back several years ago, so they were very small. I was working with the Department of Energy in the government, and we were helping to fund Elon Musk and Tesla and his team to get them started up with the Model S. And so that technology was built off of many, and that group was brilliant, but it was built off of data that they accumulated as well on electric performance, on electric technologies, and they've evolved that now into forms of autonomous driving, and I forget the term that they call it in their cars, but it's a self-driving mode, right? So they've taken data, and the data from the vehicle then to modify different sensors in the vehicle and the algorithms and the software that are driving the vehicle so that they can step it up. And there's a definition in the automotive industry around levels of automation in self-driving. So if the engineers out there are there, so Tesla is probably one of the most advanced around level 3 automation, which allows you to self-drive the car, but the driver can take back over again. But it's not completely self-driving because the driver's supposed to be watching the road the whole time. And so you see the different technologies in there monitoring the driver, but that's also capturing data that now may be marketable to insurance companies, for example, or that the auto companies would like to have access to be able to understand what's occurring in the vehicle itself and how the vehicle is responding quickly or slowly to different things. And the government, frankly, is going to want some of that data to keep track of what's occurring on the roadways as well. I think on the data side, what a lot of this will end up leading to are going to be disparities from country to country, frankly, because every country will have its own set of regulations, most likely. We'll pick on China. China probably will be one of the more severe ones because China already has a lot of control over the data in China. And so that may end up restricting innovation, frankly, in a country where data is not allowed to flow very freely. And in a place like the US, good or bad, data flows very freely here. And things like GameStop occur because data flows too freely sometimes, right? So, so it's there'll be restrictions here, I think, as well. What's happened in the U.S., frankly, is on data. The one way to overcome it, and when I worked with the Department of Energy, we looked at many models like this as well, is that even when you put the restrictions in place many times, then the challenge for the company is that how do they provide an incentive to the consumer to want to participate?
Yeah.
Right. So when I go to, and we all have our smartphones like this, right? And so if I want to use an app, I have to make an agreement, right, with the app provider. I've basically given my freedom up in many cases, right, and given up my data. But we're willing to do that because we want to use the functionality that's become available through the technology to us. And so then it can be driven down. That's more the entrepreneurial way, to driven down to the user that I agree to go do it. Kind of like your dynamic pricing too show, right? So I'm okay now because I got a good deal. When I paid a high price, now I'm mad, but I understood why I pay a high price now. So it's like, so consumer behavior is kind of a critical part of this, but there's many ways to try and incent it. The government will be the problem in many cases if they're too restrictive in stopping some of that.
So, but at the same time, actually, the government actually wants to boom boost the industry development. Like China, actually, the government is the one that sort of paved the way for all the legal or the regulation, so to make it company easier to collect data. Like, so if you look at the contact tracing, for example, some country like China or South Korea, or Taiwan, Singapore, they are able to actually do the contact tracing using the cell phone mobility data. Well, in the US, actually, so it's very hard actually for that the state actually to do that because of all this the regulation. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That's so fighting the pandemic. That's true. That was a strength of the government control over the data.
Yes.
The downside is once we're past the pandemic,
Yes.
now with the government control over the data, now it gets more difficult to go create new things from that, right?
Yes. So, obviously actually the tech building a tech company it requires funding and investment. So, I think actually both the show and the Punch actually, since you're working at the startup actually, so how do you get the funding? Is the funding readily available in Asia? Actually, in US, they typically, if I'm starting my own company, I'll get a capital from venture capital, and depending on the stages, actually they'll knock the doors of private equity companies. So, and these are still the drivers in Asia as well. So let's start with actually the Punch, right?
Well, I think back then when we were a startup, and that's about 20 years ago, 1999. It's not as vibrant as it is today, as you can imagine, especially in the Philippines, Southeast Asian country. In the US, all of these VC fundings, angel investing, it's been the name of the game, right? And but in the Philippines, it was at least for us, we had to really build the company organically and grow the company organically in the next 10 years until we were acquired by NTT. And what has happened to us in the earlier years, we had to work closely with our principals. In our case, Microsoft has really helped us fuel some growth. They are in the market for new partners. They just established operations in the Philippines, and good for us. They've given the first business that we closed was from Microsoft, and quite a good sum. And that has helped fuel the growth and development of the company. Of course, over the years, we really have to work doubly hard, put on our entrepreneur cap, and keep on developing the business, our technology practices, and it's tough for us back then. Right now, as I mentioned a while ago, there's some it's more vibrance, I would say, here in the Philippines and across Asia Pacific, more so vibrance in where a couple of things is happening. You see in places like Singapore, Malaysia, India, and China, tech startup scene is ever so growing, and the presence of angel investors, first rounder investors, and late rounder investors, the bigger boys, I would say, are ever more increasing. Probably not to the same volume as in terms of account and funding as compared to what's happening in Europe and North America, but it is ever increasing here in Asia. As you will see, quite a number of unicorns has popped up in this part of the world. The likes of Grab, for instance, and even in the Philippines, just recently, a couple of unicorns has popped up, and I think right now we've learned a lot from more mature countries, and there's, as far as innovation is concerned, and if you look at the audience right now, there's a lot of people attending education in school like U of M, coming out of Asia, and we have, I think, majority of the ones in the call are background in Asia and roots in Asia, I would say. And I think it's just a matter of time when all of these become part of the baseline, the very foundation that has allowed, for example, the US to establish or set up, or be that has allowed to fuel and for example, the startup scene to where it is today. It is just a matter of time when Asia ASEAN region will also be at the same level, I would say. So I think harder back then, a lot easier now. But of course, there's no such thing as easy money, right? You need to really produce, make sure that you in some cases the VCs are really looking for proof of ideas first, as opposed to just an idea being pitched, right? So you need to show that you can get the customers, your first few customers, and then funding will come.
Sure, since actually you're working the Japanese startup, so how did you get your funding actually? That also actually, how do you plan to raise the money actually?
Yeah, so our company fundraised over $10 million in total. So yeah, 3 to 4 times. And yeah, overall, the situation about the investment and funding for startups are getting better and better. So in the past, like 10 years ago or 15 years ago, it was so hard for startups to fundraise. But recently, so like within the latest 5 years, some unicorn companies made a successful IPOs. So that's why in their venture capitals who invested on them got a huge return. And nowadays, more and more venture capitals appeared, and they are going to invest their promising startups, especially IT startups. And also, not only venture capital, but also big companies. Big companies like trading companies and manufacturers and carriers and so on. They also have a corporate venture capital division inside of the company, and they have a kind of a big fund. So they are also candidate investors for startups as well. And Metro Engine basically fundraised from big companies, not a venture capital, pure venture capital. For example, that's because we are going to develop a product with the big companies. We are invested by JR East, for example. JR East is the biggest railway company in Japan. They have a railway all over the west and the east of Japan, and in the future they're considering to differentiate the price for train, and we are gonna develop that kind of business idea right now, and in the future we will do that. So yeah, there are many options for startups to fundraise right now, so it's really easier than before, I think.
Okay, so the Darren, actually so what do you think is the funding availability opportunity in the tech industry in Asia? So especially, so in the consulting experience, have you advised actually, or given advice to actually about the funding investment to tech company? Yes.
Yes, yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting to hear you talk show on startup and VC funding in Japan, because that's something I have not heard as much about. We work with a lot of investors who've invested in made equity investments and some debt, but as well, but in throughout Asia, throughout Japan or Korea, China. Down to Southeast Asia and Malaysia and Thailand and Vietnam and India. And when we work with our investors, it's interesting. Their typical thesis on investment has been more looking at Japan and Korea as more mature countries in Asia. And so, like a KKR that Paul you mentioned earlier was looking primarily at Japan, Korea investments as more of a good value at this point, undervalued performance because of the markets that are over there, more mature, but they wanted to buy companies at a lower value, roll them up together. So it's definitely much more of an investor play than it was a tech play. But they're weaving technology into it because many of the companies they acquire have very good technology. And so now if they can transition the image of the company from I'll call it a rusty old company into now a tech company, then they get more out of it on their exit. From a private equity standpoint. So the private equity view is typically much shorter range. 5 to 7 years at most is their investment horizon before they want to invest, get the value and move on to another, sell it and move on to something else. Where venture capital is much longer, which is for the startup world it's generally going to be closer to maybe 7 to 10 years or more in many cases as the idea has to evolve. So the view on outside of Japan, Korea for VC, venture capital, and private equity, frankly, both, but VC especially then is what we've talked to these companies about and done due diligence and worked with them is, they're very large populations, very high growth markets. China, of course, being the largest and one of the more attractive ones. But Philippines also being very attractive. Vietnam is also another very attractive one right now. And so really the countries themselves, it's unfair to lump everybody together into Asia sometimes because everyone has a different profile that the investor wants to look at and say, okay, here's where I think the growth opportunities are. It's a great idea, and and invest in the company in that market. Typically, to develop it in that market initially, but then globalize it, and because that's where the real value then comes out. Is how do you take that investment or that technology then and say, okay, now does this have a global application? Because if it's just a local application, then it has more limited value to it. So the investors get very excited about that when they look at some of the high growth countries in Asia, as I mentioned. So that's part of, and China's so large, that's part of why China has been so attractive to many outside investors as well. It's just it's a more difficult environment to work in because back to the government a bit. So.
Mm-hmm. So this is actually a question to actually all of you. Actually, in the first dot-com boom, in the first tech industry boom, actually U.S. was clearly the driving force and epicenter, right? So do you think actually Asia has a possibility of become the place for the actual tech development, right? So, but in order to actually for that to happen, actually, what do you think actually is so the right condition of the things that need to happen, right, in Asia? So let's start with actually that's time Darren. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks. So I think that Asia is already a very good source for technology. So it's not it. So in Japan has great knowledge where you are, Show, and so Korea does, South Korea does as well. It's I always have to differentiate because North Korea maybe not so great. But the other areas there's great pockets or centers of knowledge, and so it's I don't know about it, when you say an epicenter, it'll be very interesting because I think a lot of that will really depend upon the markets that evolve in each of these areas and grow. I think a few years ago we probably would have said, for example, that China very clearly was going to be the central hub for technology and innovation, and you had examples coming out from like Jackie Ma. All right, coming out with Alibaba and the different his his version of what Amazon's trying to do here, right? And now there's much hesitation because of the restrictions that have been placed upon Ant on his spinoff, and so part of what why people invest and grow in certain areas as well is the capital is available, but the wealth is available as well, and so. Suddenly, when there's a huge investment in something like Ant that goes forward, looks very successful. It's global. They're gonna create a market in the U.S. in the West now as well. So that's why I say globalizing is critical. And then the government will squash it. I'll put it that mildly. Then there's a problem, right? So then there's investment memory around some of those things, and now there's more hesitation. And so I think on the technology side, I think it will depend upon this interaction between what's the government want to encourage and grow and allow to develop, and what private sector then will develop and grow. And then those two things will make it either attractive or not attractive then for investors to come in, because that's where it really continues to expand then, is because it has to take some capital usually to really expand the business. And so all those factors are going to be very important. And I think that Asia in general can be called a tech leader, but I think it will be actually, so each of the countries has an opportunity probably to become an epicenter in many cases because of those kind of characteristics.
Okay. So then let's go to Saka. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the point is human resources. So like I said, the money also it's getting better and better for funding environment in Asia, and for information. So there are three major types of resources: money, information, and people. And the second one, information, is getting available all over the world. So because of the internet, you can get any information, the useful information, how to start a tech company, how to avoid real mistake, how to fundraise, and so on. But the human resource, like I said, in the US, there are a lot of skillful immigrants. So the American company can work with any nationality people. So because of the English, I think English is a kind of a global language. So only if you can speak English, you can work in an excellent US company. But like in Japan, or in Asia, we let's say Japan don't accept a lot of immigrants actually. So without accepting immigrants, then we need to work with Japanese. So that's a kind of limited to human resources. To overcome that kind of situation, I think there are two options. One is to welcome immigrants, very capable, especially software engineer. Are very limited in Japan, so we need that kind of people. And the second one is to educate young Japanese people for the next generation technology like AI, blockchain, virtual reality, 5G, and so on. But when I was in University of Michigan, I was really shocked. I actually joined a engineering class in addition to the business school, and in the business school, the class is really diversified. It is intentionally diversified, and some people from many countries. So no country dominant the class. But in the engineering class, there is no intentional diversifying, I say, policy. So, and I was shocked that in class, almost half of the students were from China, and 20% are from India, and other 30% are from other countries. So I thought, I think not all Chinese and Indian students are paying for the tuition by themselves. Maybe the government or companies are supporting that students. So this is very huge. So that will be very having that will have a very big impact in the near future. So I thought actually Japan will lose again, but so I think it is very important to focusing on education for the next generation technology.
So,
I think Darren and Kosaka-san has summed it up pretty well. And just probably more for me, just to complement what they just said, I would say, well, talent and access to education probably is getting more and more pervasive, I would say, given programs such as U of M. Look at the diversity of people attending programs like this, right? More and more, I think that the talent will be blended over the years around the globe. I think the biggest catalyst now will be down to the countries and legislation and support that they put into place to encourage, startup scene, to encourage people to create companies, and more importantly, to help them nurture these companies. Yeah, well, Philippines probably as an example. It's probably in the lower end of things as far as the proper government support and regulations as compared to the likes of, say, Singapore, Malaysia, and more so in the US. And just recently there's attempts to improve on those policies and regulations. And but it will looks like it will take a while, but it's a step forward. And the countries who can do these faster and more efficiently, we will see these different countries potentially be epicenters of startup community and technology innovation, I would say. That's also probably the reason why some people move from one country to another, right? We participate in more vibrant communities, and there will be laggards, and there will be countries who will be ahead of the curve, and it is how countries and policies will support these the communities, startup scene, for example, in particular, will I believe thrive in the years to come. So I think it's an important piece. Access to talent. If you can't get it in country, you can test it out somewhere else. But I think it's companies will not be able to develop and grow as best as in a ideal setup without the proper policies in place. I would say.
So, and Darren? Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh,
He
actually,
started.
we will do. So
I
actually,
agree
my
with
final
Raj.
question. So my
So do
final
we go
question.
to GameStop now?
So we have actually many students actually who are actually thinking of actually getting a career or the building a career by either starting a tech company or the working for a company in tech related area. So what advice would you give them? So let's start with actually Darren. So right.
Okay.
So what are the actually the $10,000 advice you give to actually student on ceremony?
I hope it's better than $10,000.
Yes.
That is a very hard question, because at your point in your career as a student, it's, trust me, it's still very early. I've been around a long time, so you can make lots of mistakes. It's okay. I don't know that it's as critical to think about starting up your own company yet, unless you really have the brilliant idea and funding to get going, because it's really kind of those two to combined are absolutely critical. I like to go back to Jeff Bezos as an example. If you've read much about Jeff Bezos, it's quite interesting because he didn't grow up in a wealthy family. He's very smart, of course, but his first job out of school, he went to work for investment banking, and was very successful. And he learned a lot in that process. And so I think that's an interesting example for us to think about. If there's a tech company that you can go learn from, that might be a good place to think about. And it could be a startup company too that's already established, like a Rivian Motors, for example, or Rivian Automotive in the Michigan area, or Tesla is more mature now, but there's many there's other startups. But in Jeff Bezos' case, so he spent several years in investing, was very successful, and learned about this and created this new idea based upon what he learned, which then became Amazon, right? And so at some point, he had to take the big risk, though, of course, of saying, okay, I'm going to give up my very successful career in investment banking and then launch off into this startup to try and sell books on the internet in 1993 or 4, I think, right? And everybody probably his parents as well said you're crazy, right? And that's what will happen is when you want to go off and launch it, people will tell you you're crazy, probably, because it's it's going to be some idea that doesn't seem realistic to them at that point in time. And it will take many years probably to evolve into something really successful. I would say Amazon probably is very successful today. I think across the board, it's been pretty amazing. So that's I would say that from a career advice, I wouldn't worry as much about trying to go to the startup right away or create your own startup, but look at develop a profile of the kind of companies you want to work for, do some research and study them, develop your own profile of what you're good at doing as well, and what you like to do. And so maybe you're more financially oriented, or maybe you're more tech oriented, but really understand what your skills are, so that when you approach those companies then and reach out to them, then you know what you're selling and what they may be needing. at the same time, because it's all about fit. And then learn, because you may grow with that company. I know several people from my Tesla and Rivian, we've worked with them both, that have grown up through the organization, and it's they've done really well, and it's a startup, right? But they're both big startups now. And others have branched off and said, I've got a better idea. I'm not going to stick around here for this. I'm going to create my own. So there's many alternatives and options you can choose from, but it's a bit back to Show and Potch, what you said about education. So this is all part of education too, is learning on the job and learning from what you're doing.
Right. And thanks, Darren, for the cue. Probably I should go next, right? To the students in the call right now, I think first of all, well, of course, education very important. While you're in school, make sure you build a network. Build your network as wide as possible. Connect with your professors, your mates, and to the broader community in the U of M. I think it's it's a fantastic school and organization. My world has changed so much for the better after going through the program, and I couldn't be more thankful for U of M. And when you get out, well, while you're there, try to build the perspective of what you want to do. And I know it can be difficult sometimes, but you can expand your perspective and knowledge by checking out what the different companies what are the companies that you can read about, who looks like an interesting place to work for. Maybe do some research around them, and find an area or space you think you'll thrive off, I would say. And Darren mentioned about forming a startup. Of course, if you have a good idea, well, any of the means and access, well, go for it. But I think the mentality of some of the points that I'm going to share applies to whether you do a startup or be part of an organization. And that is really have a perspective, a point of view of the future of how your company can be yours, or it can be for if you're working for someone else, how that company service or products will benefit your customers, challenge the norms, and challenge the current ways of the organization, and take a different view and see what if we do it this way, right? Different way to engage our customers, different way to bring value to our customers. We don't do this now, but maybe it makes sense to do this now. Ask those questions, and while you're young, you have the energy to do it, right? And when you're starting up something, you must learn also if you fail on an idea, you fail real quick, pivot and try to move to a different area, and again, applicable in your career as a professional within a company, right? It's all about perspective, and it's all about your own beliefs. That well, belief is one thing, right? But backing that up with research, reading, connecting, conversing with your peers, customers, and I think that will help you form ideas on how to to better serve customers, for instance, and maybe you'll end up with coming up with new industry paradigms, disruptive ideas, and come up with an idea for your own startup. So I think while you're there, build a network, and and really start thinking of start researching companies and newer trends, big data, disruptive companies, right? Companies that are well, right now the emerging pieces around biotech, where a lot of companies now are looking at things like our Renee in developing new technologies and new vaccines, right? And you see a lot of these new industries being formed and disruptive innovation coming out in recent years from different companies. So that's it for me. That's my advice, and good luck as you complete your education in U of M, and good luck. Looking for once you step out of U of M, whether you land in a corporate job or start your own company.
Sure. So
Yeah. Well, I don't know the background of the maybe the student who are listening to this session, but I guess most of them don't have a engineering background. Maybe they from a business school, right? Well, my advice will be to make your own application by yourself. Like web application, mobile application, whatever. When I was a student in University of Michigan Business School, in one of the classes I took, I built my first web application. It was so hard because I had no programming experience, but it was so helpful for me to understand what the technology is. So without knowing the technology, what the technology is, then you can't come up with the business idea. And even if you find an issue, what the customers need, what customers want, and so on, but you cannot make a good decision how to approach that issue. You have to pick a right technology to solve that issue, but without knowing that technology, you can't make a right decision. So to understand the technology, I would strongly recommend to build your own application or any product. Yeah, so if you it depends on what kind of company you want to go. If you want to go to the robotics companies, it'll be good to build a small robotics. If you want to go to a data science company, it'll be good to build your own AI model, whatever. But building your own some product or application will be very helpful for your future career.
okay.
Yep.
So now actually I will open the floor to the question from audience. You can actually type the question in chat, or you can just speak. So if you want to speak actually then ask question, please actually unmute the microphone, right? Eldon, so you have a question? So yeah. Yes, yeah, Eldon, please ask question. Yes.
He's on mute still, I think.
Yeah, you're on mute. Yes, sir.
Hi everyone, thank you for such a good presentation. And this is a question, I guess, for Mr. Kosaka. You said that you never had any experience in building web applications and you managed to pull it off in the end. I was wondering, what steps did you take to teach yourself, and how was the learning curve, or any advice you would recommend to people when they want to start a web application?
Mm-hmm. Well, so recently there are many good resources to learn programming, and I would recommend to use online video courses to learn Python, Java, anything is okay. Maybe Python will be good for beginners. So in addition to having a lecture and a class of business school, it'll be good to learn by yourself on an online video course. This is very helpful, but you have to spend a lot of time in a short period. So yeah, it's hard, but it's very fun, I think.
So anybody answer what one stands actually for the, oh, you have a question, Christine, you have a question for Darren. Yes.
I think you're on mute, Christine.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh,
Wow.
hi. Thank you. Sorry, I wasn't able to unmute myself. Thank you, Professor. I took your class last year. I really liked it. Thank you.
Oh,
So I'm about 26. So I have a question for Darren. Thank you so much for all the insights. Actually, your background is very interesting, and I almost have a kind of similar background. I worked in automotive and new energy before, and interested to switch my career into strategy consulting. So I was just wondering, like, how did you transfer your experience from automotive and robotic manufacturing to strategy consulting? Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Christine. You know, in many ways, it's similar to what we were all describing on starting up a company too. A lot of that is studying and learning. So studying, you know, projects I'd work on with clients, but then studying other things related to the project that could expand beyond just the solution. So, for example, I remember a long time ago working on putting in information systems, so ERP systems, but it was focused, my role was focused on the financial systems primarily. And so if I had just stayed focused in on only the financial systems, then I would have been really good. You know, I think I was pretty good at financial stuff, but I started going, and this was not automotive either. So this was actually a food processing plant. So I started going out in the plant, started going to meet with others outside of the financial group in the sales area, and then learned about food processing, and which is, some of it's kind of disgusting, but it's you know, some of it's pretty interesting. There's a lot of technology, frankly, in food processing that's pretty amazing of what they do to back then and even today, as far as using technology to make our food you know, hopefully healthier for us. But by learning that, then I could learn about the whole business. And then now in our strategy consulting, I take some of those same learnings and we'll meet with food companies or beverage companies many times to talk about, you know, where should they go in the industry, and what's going to, you know, what kind of products, well, how should they use technology themselves in the future. And so I think that's a lot of that is just learning about whatever you're working on, how to expand the horizon of what you're working on and studying it. And Professor Ahn, I'm sure, would agree with some of that too. Some of this is taking his class and learning, expanding out beyond that as well, which sounds like a show is done as well. And so that's really, I think that's probably the key to not just strategy consulting, but to success for you in your career too.
Thank you so much. That was very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we have time for one more question. So who has the honor to actually ask the last question?
I have a question.
Yes.
So at first, I want to say thank you to Professor Ahn and all the guest speakers for attending our conference and sharing your experiences with us. I have a question for Darren. So you mentioned that you worked with Tesla before and you helped them find funding. How are they struggling and how did you advise them? Or like, how did you help them stand out and get funding? And how is Tesla's leading power now?
Well, I'll start on the last one. Tesla, I didn't look yesterday, but I think it's about $800 billion market value. So it's actually quite amazing. Back in 2009, it's actually a very interesting story, which will go on much longer than this probably, but I'll shorten it a bit. So they had a small car called the Roadster that they developed this electric technology for, and electric vehicles. Most people didn't think they were realistic in 2009. It was kind of like, that's a science fiction story, interesting, but batteries aren't good enough. There's all kinds of reasons why electric will never work. And now we have, I think, over 80 new models, electric models coming out in the next couple of years. First step and this was not my idea actually, so I can't claim credit, but so it was Elon's idea actually, as he sent a team. He was able to attract the head of engineering from Mercedes to come to California to meet with them. And some of you may have heard of this story. So the head of engineering thought he was going to go through a PowerPoint presentation, right, to pitch for funding. And Elon sent a team of his engineers to Mexico. They bought a smart car and brought it back up to Northern California, gutted the bottom of it, and put an electric drive in. And when the head of engineering for Mercedes showed up for the meeting, Elon tossed him the keys and said, "Take it for a drive." And of course, this guy's, he doesn't understand what's going on. That car, I drove that car. It is so fast, it would snap your head back. Because the electric power is like an on-off switch. So it's and it's really short because it's a smart car. So after that, that's all they talked about. That after he drove the car, was amazed by how he could put the electric drive into a smart car. And then within 4 weeks, Daimler, Mercedes' parent, had come in. They did evaluation of the company, set it at $500 million. They put in 10%, so $50 million. And that was the seed funding that then flipped Tesla over to where the Department of Energy then was willing to give them $500 million to develop the Model S. And they went public. And now, the story is a legend at this point, because it's worth $800 billion. It's worth more than every other OEM in the world. At least it's based in North America. So it's not an auto company. Clearly, it's a tech company.
Thank you so much.
So now that will conclude actually the technology panel. Thank you all for your participating. I'd like to remind you, actually, there will be more panels in next Friday and Saturday. So one of the big change in the Asian Business Conference is that because it's happening online, actually, instead of spending a whole day at the conference, now the conference will be spread over 4 days. So there will be event on next Friday and Saturday, and come out and meet new speaker at next week. So thank you so much, and enjoy your weekend. Right?
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you
Have
so
a good
much.
day.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you. Have a good day.